Hey, Jason.
Hey Garth, good to see you.
And you, sir. And you. Hey, listen, you and I are both in schools. You and I both get to interact with some incredible young human beings.
Every day.
Just the other day, I connected with a graduate from my school, Havergal College, who's now living and working in New York City. And we try and catch up once a year at the very least. And she was telling me about her life in New York City, working for this financial company. And in that story, I heard resilience, perseverance. I heard joy as
Hmm.
well. Do you have a student that comes to mind when you think of resilience and perseverance?
Aha. You know what? The first thing I think of, Garth, is not one student. I think of all of our students at Rundle
Nice.
Academy. So we've got a program for kids with learning disabilities, grade 4 to grade 12, called Rundle Academy. What we see is students coming in feeling like they're less than, feeling like
Mm.
they aren't able to learn, that they, will forever struggle. And what we have the golden opportunity to do is to show them that they are not less than. They're creative, divergent thinkers, and they've got every opportunity in the world to learn. And so the other day I was looking at our graduate list, and we've graduated 600 students from there in the last 20 years. So that's 600 stories of resilience and grit, and every single one of them would tell you about how the transformative education Rundle Academy brought them through that. And so yeah, I think about every student at Rundle Academy. That's I see all their faces right now when you ask me that question. I'm glad you did.
That's a beautiful answer. Thanks, Jason. Yeah, and that's a good kickoff to this conversation that you and I have in episode one of exploring resilience and perseverance. So, listeners, we provide some different looks, some articles, and some ideas on what it means to lead with and through moments where you need resilience.
Right on. I hope you enjoy the show.
Thanks, everyone.
With Garth and Jason, we dive right in. Breaking down Ted's world, let's begin. From AFC, Richmond's field to your day to day. Lassoing leadership's here to stay. Keep leading the lasso way. Together we'll grow stronger every day. So plug in your headphones and let's start the show. With lessons from Ted, we'll learn and grow.
Welcome back to Lassoing Leadership. I'm Jason Rogers.
And I am Garth Nichols, thrilled to be back.
Yeah, this is an important one, Garth. We're going to talk about a couple really key topics when it comes to leadership. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Yeah, this is episode one of our deep dive into resilience and perseverance. And it's exciting because we've talked a lot about other ways that you can lead. You can lead from empathy and compassion. You can build trust. You can lead with heart, spend a lot of time building relationships, but it all has its challenges and it takes its toll on the internal resources of a leader, doesn't it?
Oh, I think so, Garth. And I think we're going to talk about those internal resources as well as how do you leverage external resources throughout the course of this pod. And I think it just brings to light for me how complicated leadership is, whether you're in education or in industry, and how much it takes to do that. And I think in order to do those things, you do have to have a fair bit of resilience and perseverance to get through it. So today, in the next 15 minutes or so, we'll take a look at the role of resilience and perseverance and how they play in our leadership practice. Next episode, we'll speak with an amazing special guest who we're going to tease at the end of this episode. And in the third one, as always, we'll come back to listener questions and answers.
Yeah. So, Jason, this theme of resilience and perseverance, for some reason, it just made me really miss the team, the Greyhounds,
I
Ted
miss them
Lasso.
too. Yeah, I miss them
Yeah.
too, Garth. I'm looking forward to the show coming back in season 4, and I actually plan to rewatch the whole series as we lead into it. But I think today we'll lean back into the series and bring our listeners to that. Um, but I think they all demonstrated some level of perseverance, and they showed how it
Yeah.
isn't a linear journey with leadership. There are ebbs and flows. There are times when you're flat and when you're at the top of the mountain. It's just, different times, different spaces in our leadership. When you
Yeah.
think about it, Garth, if we're talking about Lasso, does anybody come to mind for you?
Oh, for sure. For me, it was. I mentioned him a couple times in season one. For me, it's Sam Obisanya.
Yeah, of course, of course.
Yeah, I think his like resilience, his principled stand against the team sponsor of
Yep.
Dubai Air. Because Dubai Air, the parent company, is complicit in environmental damage in his hometown of Nigeria. So his principled stand, I think that demonstrates not just moral integrity, but also
Hmm.
profound grit. Passion, perseverance, all of these things come together for him to be able to make that stand on his own, right? And
Hmm.
Sam's decision to speak out reflects his commitment to values that extend beyond the team, beyond his personal comfort or professional gain. And I think if we look at grit in particular and its connection to resilience and perseverance, Angela Duckworth's theory comes to mind, like this dedication to one's goals. And when Sam makes that stand, he risks so much alienation, professional repercussions, his place on the team, but he was okay with that. And so I think it's important to know that Sam has something inside of him that keeps him going through this stand. Like he was willing to take that risk. And so, also Brené Brown, Sam Obisanya, like it's true courage. Like he was willing to be vulnerable, publicly opposing this. And I thought it was so beautiful when Jamie Tart, he puts the piece of tape over his thing, says, "You can't do it alone, right? We're team.
Hmm.
We have the same sponsor." Yeah. So he opens himself up to judgment, Sam does, and potential loss, right? And that's vulnerability.
Hmm.
But it strengthens his character. It inspires others, including Jamie and his entire team. And on the whole, I think it results in a really strong sort of masterclass in resilient leadership, enriched by vulnerability and grit and integrity. And that leadership often requires facing fear to stay true to oneself. So I'm glad you asked. There's Sam Obisanya.
That was rich, Garth. And I think, like, in this day and age of leadership, I think this idea of, moral grit and standing up for what's right and what's true is really important to reflect on. I think we're going to see lots of opportunities in the coming years to reflect on this, whether it's at a global level or it's a local level, as to how this plays out. And sometimes, I worry that may be eroding in leadership. And I think it's something I'd love for our listeners to reflect on, is how does that moral and ethical grit play out in their day-to-day leadership? I think it's
Yeah.
pretty important.
Now, I'm only halfway through, but this book, which I'm showing to our listeners if they're watching, it's called Outrage. It's by Kurt Gray. He's actually Canadian, but he's at North Carolina, right? He's down in North Carolina right now. Outraged, why we fight about morality and politics and how to find common ground.
Mhm.
And it's brilliant. In fact, I was watching the Buffalo Bills on Sunday night and couldn't put this book down.
No doubt,
Uh,
that good.
yeah, really interesting stuff just in terms of moral integrity, in terms of finding common ground with people in a polarized world. I really like that. Speaking of polarized, what character comes up for you? Because I'm thinking it's Roy Kent, where resilience meets stubbornness.
Garth, I think that's an easy answer. I really do
Yeah.
think it could be Roy Kent. I think we see
Okay.
him, moving through his trajectory. And we talked a lot about this in season one, where, we see that he's gone from a professional footballer to, commentator to coach, and the resilience, grit, the kind of fortitude that was required to pull him through that. But for me, it's not Roy Kent that comes to mind first. It's actually the lead character. It's Ted Lasso. And I think we see Ted in all sorts of precarious positions.
Mm,
First of all, people don't believe in him as a coach, and then we see his marriage fall apart. Then we see him deal with interpersonal conflict throughout. And somewhere in his reservoir, he's got perseverance and grit, and that keeps him coming back. And I think sometimes people will, say he's optimistic or maybe Pollyanna, but I actually think that he is, steadfast. He's
mm,
resolved
yeah.
in his vision for what leadership is, personally, but also organizationally. And it's that purpose that allows him to find the resilience and the grit that's required. And I think that's totally true in leadership.
I love that. For listeners who may not have done season one yet, we actually at the end of every episode in season one we say, "Who's your favorite character?"
Mm-hmm.
And we very rarely chose Ted,
That's true.
but in the end, he was your favorite character in the last episode.
Yeah, I think the arc of the whole thing brings you
Yeah,
to that, right? And I
yeah,
think, he is such an everyman who is such an incredible um, magic to him. And I think that magic lives in his resilience, grit, his leadership, his vision, and his overall purpose in helping people be the best people they can be. And in the end, the organization obviously thrives under that leadership.
yeah. So like that's fun, eh? Sam and Ted bring those guys back. But Jason, how do you define resilience as it pertains to leadership?
You know, I think this is showing up even when you don't want to. Because I think we have to be honest. Leadership isn't all roses. I think we all feel that. So I think you have to ask yourself, if you're going to have to show up even when you don't want to, that's a reality in leadership and in life. What is it that's going to drive you to show up and give you the energy to do so in a really
Yeah,
authentic and true way? And so when I think about this, it does come back to, I mentioned a few times on the podcast already. One is purpose. So how does your purpose align with the organization and the people you work with? And the second one that I've been thinking an awful lot about is mattering. I don't know, Garth, have you come across this book called Never Enough?
briefly, I haven't read it, but it's been cited in a couple of conversations I've been in for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's profoundly important in this day and age. And the author talks an awful lot about this sense of mattering. So,
Mm.
mattering is, do we matter to other people? Do other people matter to us? Does our work matter in a context that is larger than our own? And this sense of mattering and belonging, I think, lines up nicely with some of the Brene Brown work and also the work that Bell and Tim did in how to navigate life and being purposeful. And so I think, honestly, that idea of perseverance and grit is rooted in purpose and mattering. And that's how I see it. It's showing up even when you don't want to and knowing that you can do an extraordinary job. What about you, Garth?
Well, I'm going to push you a little bit further, Jason.
Please, please.
When's a time when you had to demonstrate resilience? When did you have to show up when you didn't want to? You
Well,
can use current times right now if
yeah.
you like.
Yeah, no, I think, last Thursday night we did have a parent night and I was kind of suffering through a bit of a head cold. And I have to admit, I'd rather probably have been in bed, but you know what? That work is really, really important in helping our parents
Mhm.
understand, mission, vision, values of Rundle and how we can support their children into the grade 10 years. So I think, we face all sorts of challenges, whether it's personal, financial, health, or otherwise. And I think, it does require us to show up even when we don't want to, more often than I think most people admit.
Yeah,
But back to purpose and mattering, if you've got a purpose that's aligned and you know that it matters, you can find the resilience and perseverance to show up.
yeah, nice.
Yeah, what about you, Garth?
Like an example for me demonstrating resilience. Well, like I in my title at Havergal College, it's innovation, right? And innovation is kind of anathema in some organizations where like institutions are meant to maintain the status quo, right?
Yeah,
And so when you're innovating, you're asking people, programs, systems, and structures to change. And so for me, I think resilience in this context, and I draw on the work of John Cotter from Harvard
mm-hmm.
Business School,
Yeah,
and in his cycle of innovation, one of the steps is how do you sustain and protect innovation? And I find myself showing up in that role sometimes because if there's enough sort of friction and wear on an innovation, sometimes you just want to be like, yeah, you know what? You're right. It does impact timetable. It does, impact energy within the systems that we use in terms of human resources, financial resources. So maybe it is better to just leave it alone and no longer carry forth with it. But then you have to go back. And I heard in your response, the importance, like what matters to you. For me, what matters is the innovation. How can this organization of the school flex those muscles in order to keep moving and making education relevant, making sure that we're serving our students, not now, for their future selves. So I really like that. I really like that idea of protecting innovation, and that takes resilience, to show up every day and say, we haven't been here before, but it's the right direction. So, yeah.
I think, and for our listeners who don't know John Cotter well, Garth, I suspect you probably have a thing or two more to share with them about Cotter's work. Is there anything else you want to share to really bring them in the loop, and then maybe inspire them to get out there and pick up Leading Change, which I think is a truly transformative work?
Yeah, I think one of the resilience can have a strategy to it, right? And for me, it's fostering small wins. So Cotter stresses the importance of achieving and celebrating these like short-term wins, these small victories, build momentum, boost morale. They demonstrate that the innovation is actually viable and possible. So, for example, you could be adjusting processes or showcasing early successes. That helps reduce the skepticism, helps reduce the tension and friction that you might be feeling. It also brings along potentially some sort of like early champions with the work. So yeah, Leading Change is amazing. They keep updating the work as well. So it's great.
That's great. I mean, a long time ago, I saw a speaker, I think it was Ty, and he talked about getting an early win in Iowa. And he talked about, how so much of the American presidential race is decided in Iowa, a fairly small and somewhat irrelevant state with respect to the population. But when you get an early win in Iowa, it does set the course for the rest of for the preliminary races. And so I've always thought that, Garth, is if you can get an early win in innovation or system change and prove that it's beneficial, you're off to the races. And I think Cotter hits that on the head. And also recommend that leaders spend some time cultivating culture of resilience. Resilient organizations have cultures that support adaptability, that understand the status quo is important, but adaptability and change and innovation is also really important. I think that comes through the vision of the leader. By embedding values such as continuous learning and collaboration, leaders can ensure that teams are ready to face setbacks and adjust course without abandoning the ship or the change as it is.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think back to Ted Lasso, what mattered to him was making these young men better people in the end. And we've spoken about this at length on season 1. Like in particular in season 1 as well.
Yeah, and I'd recommend going back to a particular episode where we hit this on the head. It's it isn't season 1, but it's in season 3 of the show, episode 5, Signs. It's a great episode, and we get right into it. All right, Garth. As we get closer to the end of this podcast, we like to recommend read, listen, and we've done a few of those already. But what do you have for our listeners when it comes to read or listen or watch?
Yeah, great article out of a company called Resilient Leadership. It's called Navigating Change and Uncertainty with Strength and Adaptability. So I love that title in and of itself. But the article examines the significance of resilience in leadership, key characteristics of resilient leaders, and their impact on the organization. So it provides strategies for developing adaptability, strategies for developing emotional intelligence, and, as we've talked about, a purpose-driven approach. These are all crucial for thriving in, this dynamic environment in which we live. What about you, Jason?
Well, beyond the books Never Enough and Navigating Life, I think having a look at Simon Sinek's podcast with Angela Duckworth, Raising Resilient Kids, and Angela Duckworth's book Grit is foundational to all of this. But back to the podcast, Angela talks about resilience in our younger generations. And since younger generations are heading into the workforce, it's a good reminder that their needs and skills can adapt and, support themselves as they move ahead.
Yeah. Lots of good quick bites here. Let's not forget that we have a special guest in that Squeaks pod, and this special guest is very special to you, Jason. Tell us more.
Oh man, this is one of our students at Rundle. I've had a chance of knowing this student. His name's Henry for the past decade, and Henry is a true inspiration. He sits on boards from across the country and in our province. He volunteers widely, and he's got a life story that is unmatched. And he's about to graduate high school this year, but he has taught me more about resilience and grit and fortitude and mindset than any book or human could. And so I can't wait to get him on the podcast and hear his perspective. And I think our listeners are really going to enjoy it.
Yeah, I'm so looking forward to that one. It's going to be great. So listeners, get your listening ears on. Your questions going for us about how to lead with resilience and even be resilient as a leader.
Yeah, check out those resources and be sure to send any questions or ideas that you have to share with us. And I think, Garth, if you can believe it, that's a wrap. This one has flown by for me, but I do hope that people like, subscribe, and tell your friends. Remember, you can get a hold of us at lassowingleadership@gmail.com.
That's right. So until next time, folks, keep leading the Lasso way. Thanks everybody.
Garth.
Thanks, Jason.
Thanks,
Step up to the mic, it's time to play. Lassoing leadership every day. From the pitch to the boardroom, lessons called to mind. Keep leading the Lasso way. You'll find we've got heart, we've got soul, and humor too. Exploring how Ted shows what leaders should do. With Garth and Jason, we dive right in, breaking down Ted's world. Let's begin from AFC Richmond's field to your day to day. Lassoing leadership's here to stay. Keep leading the Lasso way. Together we'll grow stronger every day. So plug in your headphones and let's start the show.